Hey guys, go ahead and break out your gear. We are going to continue on with globalization here. Okay, by globalization, I know you by now, hopefully, you guys have started to read up on this a bit. By globalization, we're talking about the movement of stuff and people and money around the globe with minimal or far fewer restrictions than had been pre-World War II. An example I've got on the screen there, you guys, is tariffs. Think about during the Great Depression, we talked about economic nationalism. Um, and this idea that the way to protect your country is to erect barriers, and so tariffs were one example of that. Um, well, so in any case, after World War II, the thinking changed, and the attitude was, how do you prevent governments from you know falling under the control of dictators like Hitler and the Nazis? Um, how do you make communism and socialism less attractive? You increase everybody's standard of living. At least that was the thinking. And so after World War II, you see the globalization of trade and immigration and culture. And so we're going to look at all that stuff in the next few minutes. Okay. So when we're talking about trade, a bit of an alphabet soup here. Okay. So we got two different organizations. Actually, the first one, GATT, is a treaty. GATT stands for General Agreement on Tariffs and Trade. Um, this was signed shortly after World War II, um, and it was a treaty. It was an international agreement designed to reduce tariffs, to reduce barriers to trade, to make it easier for people to transfer, goods back and forth across the globe. Um, and removing a lot of those restrictions, those barriers. The organization that would administer that, okay, that would actually be in charge of enforcing GATT, is the WTO. WTO stands for World Trade Organization, and it does exactly what it sounds like. It does. It monitors trade around the world. And when countries who have signed on to GATT, those countries that have joined GATT, if they break that treaty, it's the WTO's job to actually enforce that treaty, and in some cases punish them, not by invading them, but uh, through other economic punishments. Forcing them to pay fines, just as an example. And this happens all the time, and even some of the heavy hitters, China, the United States, the EU, the European Union, they've all had to pay fines levied by the World Trade Organization, and because its goal is to limit those barriers. And when a country that has signed on to GATT, when a country like that, breaks the treaty, it's the WTO's job to enforce that. Then you've got in other parts of the world, I only gave you two examples, but in certain parts of the world, you have different blocks, okay, different trading blocks or trading organizations. That's not a typo. That's how you spell this block. And so one example is the EU, okay, the European Union. When the EU was formally, or when the last building blocks were put into place, just a couple of decades ago, borders dropped, among EU nations. They adopted one common currency. What's the currency called? And they got rid of all their tariffs, and they agreed to like the same standards for cheese and for lumber and for cars, and it was intended to make trade that much easier. Second block, you guys, OPEC, is a petroleum um, exporting cartel, right? And OPEC stands for uh, Organization of Petroleum Exporting Countries. And you can see there on the pie chart there, you can see the members of OPEC. You see how much they contribute to OPEC. And so when gas prices go up and down, or fuel supplies go increase or shrink, that's largely OPEC's decision. Those are the heavy hitters. And you see how much of the total oil reserves is controlled by OPEC nations on the left pie chart there. And on the right, you see the major countries that are members to OPEC. And so again, the idea was that they were going to make trade more efficient and in this case, trade in oil, and that would increase the wealth, theoretically, of all those member nations. All right, let's move on to globalizing culture. Okay, guys. So when we're talking about globalizing culture here, we're like what I've got there on the slide. Wherever trade goes, culture usually follows. Whether you're talking about religion, something we talked over and over about. You guys remember Indian Ocean trade, and how it wasn't just goods that moved around the Indian Ocean, but it was also religion such as Hinduism, especially Islam, Buddhism as well. So that's what we're talking about. That's the frame I want you guys to be thinking about this through. So there I gave you guys some examples, okay, of globalized culture. Reggae starts off in Jamaica in the 1970s, and then because of trade around the Caribbean and the Western Hemisphere, and then later on the world, reggae moves everywhere. Right? It is as of last year, it is the most popular form of or genre of pop music in Britain. Okay, last year in 2019, it gets started in Jamaica, continues on to Britain. Okay, who'd have thunk? Uh, McDonald's is everywhere. I'm going to send you guys some links to some McDonald's commercials, from India or from Malaysia. It is like wild stuff, right? You'll see exactly what we're talking about. Um, Barbie, here in the West, she's known as Barbie. Throughout the Middle East, I think there's a picture of her right there. Her name is Fula, all right? Um, but you start off this toy starts off in the United States and eventually becomes popular worldwide. Well, there are certain parts of the world where it doesn't make sense to try to sell, a doll wearing a bikini, like in the Middle East, where it's much more culturally conservative. So you sell a, a version that's customized to local tastes. And why are you doing it? To make a profit, to sell as many of those things as possible. Um, Same thing goes for sports. Okay, soccer it may not be all that popular here in the United States, right? At least compared to what it is around the world, but it is obviously like the number one most popular sport on planet Earth. Okay, I mean it's not even close. Now there's a downside to this because oftentimes local populations will see they won't necessarily see this as a good thing. They'll see this as a form of imperialism, right? And it's actually known as cultural imperialism. When countries like the United States or Western European countries export their stuff, their culture, their style of music, and what it does sometimes is it crowds out the local diets, local foods, local styles of music, and other aspects of culture. And so be aware that, this is not necessarily always seen as a positive. Sometimes it's definitely seen as a negative. And it's referred to as, again, as cultural imperialism. As long as we're sticking with the dark side of things, last slide here, you guys, is some of the other problems that have come with globalization. And I know those of you guys who took, Hug last year, you guys are well acquainted with this stuff. The environmental damage that comes with all of this trade and all of this movement of stuff around the planet. You've got oceans warming, obviously. You've got the planet warming. The euphemism is climate change, but it's changing because it's getting warmer, progressively. Um, and part of the reason that is, because you've got so much fossil fuel being burned in transportation or in the manufacturing of goods in factories. Um, you've got deforestation. Um, the photo down there is, I do believe, from the Brazilian rainforest, the Amazon. Um, and when you clear cut those many millions of acres of forest, you're altering the climate. You're taking that much plant life out of the equation. What do they call the Amazon, the lungs of the world? That's going to have an impact, and it is having an impact. So you've got deforestation throughout Africa, Southeast Asia. Remember we talked about palm oil, a couple of months back. Now palm oil, you guys, isn't just like a little cottage industry where people walking around like picking up palm seeds, crushing them down for their oil. Now you've got millions of acres of palm trees, being grown, and you're crowding out the indigenous forests in those parts of the world. Then you got obviously air and water pollution that goes along with that. Okay. On top of that, the last chapter in our book, chapter 14, I believe it is, maybe it's 15, talks a lot about inequality. Okay, and growing inequality between the global north and the global south. If you take a look at that map there, you guys, the blues, and the shades of blue, those are the countries with lower levels of income. The yellows are in the middle, and the reds are the high areas. And where are the high areas? Stick with the same pattern we've been working with, probably since December. North America, Western Europe, Japan, Australia gets lumped in there as well, Australia, because it was part of the, what do we call that collection of British colonies, those former British colonies, the Commonwealth of Nations. So, you're definitely going to see some downsides of that as well. And you guys will run across that in the last chapter of the book. Okay. Just a quick heads up, you guys, I'm recording this on Wednesday, early afternoon. Tomorrow, Thursday, we have a webcast with the College Board where they are going to give us the updates on what to expect on regarding AP testing, testing dates, testing formats, all that stuff. As soon as I get that info, I will pass it along to you guys. Okay. In the meantime, you guys keep up on your homework and be good to each other. All right. And thanks for playing along. Talk to you guys later. Bye.